And we'll see how that goes. This might be a bit of a waste of time, but I guess we will find out. It's public. Well, I know my video output is low. My internet's never decent. That's one concern. Maybe my internet's too bad to do this. That would certainly be a problem. My computer's certainly not happy about this. I don't know if it's gonna work. I should post the tweet on the OC Twitter. Yo, I am just posting links, places, so people can be aware that this is going on. It's kind of late, and it is Sunday night, so I don't know how many people will show up, and it may be that my internet's going to be too poor to stream effectively, but I guess we'll see how that goes. Let me just make this tweet, and then I'll take a look back at the chat. Okay, that should be all right. Hey, man. How do I say this? Shankatsu Forte asks, my first question is, are you alright, dude? You look like you just went through a breakup. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm a little tired, because I spent all day editing Splatoon videos. I recorded. I decided to record demonstrations of both guitar parts for all of the match themes from Splatoon 2, because I like those songs a lot, and they're pretty easy to play, and I thought people might be interested in learning how to play them, and so I recorded demonstrations of those, and I made guitar tabs for that, and I uploaded those, but editing them was, it's just a very time-consuming process, so I spent most of today doing that. And isn't it too late for a Q&A vid? Yes, probably so. But, we'll see how that goes. Hey, Mitchell, what's up? So Lewis is asking how to develop. Lewis, what are my Roman numerals? XIV. I'd be like, what? He's asking how to develop a melody that develops into a sonata form. Well, I don't know exactly what a sonata form is. I used to know, but I forgot. So I don't know about the specifics of that. Hey, Mark. Modes are one of my favorite topics, so if you've got a question about those, please go ahead and ask. Mauricio, I hope I'm saying that right. I may not be. Turn on the lights or get a dot lux. Don't mess up your eyes. Yeah, you're probably right. I'll do that. Thanks, Blue Guitar Music. I'm really glad that you like them. So let's see. There are several questions here, and I'll try and answer them in the order that they were asked. So first of all, Mark Taylor is asking, for modes, are they only shown by accidentals? Do you look at the key signature to find the key and then see some accidentals and tell what mode it's in? Like, how can you look at a score and tell what mode it's in? Well, that kind of depends. It used to be that if a piece of music was written with a specific mode, it would be written with a key signature that corresponded to that, so that there would be no accidentals. So let's say you're writing with G mixolydian, which has no sharps or flats, and so rather than use the normal key signature for G major, which would be a single sharp, you would use a key signature with no sharps or flats to correspond to that. And I would not be surprised if some people still did that. But it's the common way of going about it now is to just use whatever key signature corresponds to the default major or minor scale of whatever your tonic degree is. So if we're in the key of G, major, because mixolydian is a major mode. Say we're using say the piece uses G mixolydian. Nowadays, most people would write a score like that with one sharp in the key signature. So it depends, but I think for the most part, you can expect to see it. So if you see a key signature and it's got one sharp, and you see that there's an F natural that shows up consistently throughout the piece, then you can know it's probably in G major and it's using mixolydian, or it's in E minor and it's using Phrygian. But that's hard. It's hard to say. It's hard to say because music isn't always written with a specific scale. A lot of music does conform to a given scale, but a lot of music doesn't, especially in game music. You'll find accidentals all over the place that are there for lots of different reasons. So it depends, and it's kind of a difficult question to answer because not all music is written with a specific scale. Let me read up. I'll try and answer these a little bit faster so I don't miss anything. So Jonathan Sned asks, can you talk about the functional use of split member chords? I've not heard that term before, so if you can describe exactly what you mean, then I can better answer your question. Kenneth D. Souza says, "Hey, I saw your earlier videos where you were figuring out chord progressions on the spot and was hoping to get advice about how you got to the level that you are. So that's sort of a skill that developed by accident, or unintentionally, I should say, because so to recognize chord progressions on the spot, sorry, to recognize chord progressions on the spot, you need to have, assuming you don't have perfect pitch or absolute pitch, which I do not, and very few people do, you need a well-developed relative pitch. Now, the good news is that anybody can train. Anybody has the seeds for relative. Anyone who is not tone deaf has the ability to develop relative pitch, by definition, because relative pitch is the ability to tell apart specific notes, and how far apart those notes are. And so you might ask, how do you do that? How do you start doing that in the first place? And the answer to that is, well, you have to start numbering your notes and chords relative to whatever your tonal center is. It gets a little more difficult with atonal music, but you can... all that means is that your range is smaller. Anyway, so you should be practicing... first of all, you should be getting used to knowing the sounds of your chords and intervals to begin with. So, play various intervals, play a major third, make sure you can guess that it's a major third. There's a website called musictheory.net, which is a very generic name, but don't be put off by that. They have a lot of great lessons and tests and stuff on their website. I believe they have an interval training exercise on there where they play back intervals and you guess which one it is, and it's really good for training your ear for that. As well as chords, you should be able to hear a major chord and be able to tell that's a major chord. You should be able to hear a diminished chord and tell that's a diminished chord, and so on and so forth. And but as far as working out chord progressions, well, that has to do with numbering your, for the most part, with numbering your chords and notes to where they are on the compared to the tonics. So, for example, in the key of C, your 4 chord is F major. You should so when you encounter an F chord in the key of C, you should not be thinking of it so much as an F chord. You should be thinking of it as a 4 chord, because the 4 chord is going to sound exactly the same in the key of C as it does in the key of E flat. It'll be higher or lower or whatever, but it's going to have the same general vibe to it. That's the reason you can hear 2 songs in different keys and notice that, oh, hey, they're using the same progression or they sound similar. That's why you can do that. So what I would do, I said that I learned it by mistake. The way I did that was because I was learning some K-On music. It's an anime, and I was learning some K-On music on the guitar, and there were a lot of chords in these progressions, and so they weren't quite as simple as what I was used to, and so I wanted to memorize them a little bit easier, so I thought maybe converting the chords names to Roman numerals, so instead of E flat, B flat, A flat, I would just put 1, 5, 4 or something like that. I thought maybe doing that would make it a little bit easier for me to memorize, and so I started doing that, and I also started converting other songs' chord progressions to Roman numerals because I was bored and I wanted something to do, so I did that. And then several months later, after doing this fairly consistently, I realized that I could tell chord progressions by ear. So I was listening to a song. It was I forget the name of it, but it's the first track after the opening theme on the True Tears soundtrack. It has like a Pachelbel's canon progression. It's like D, A over C sharp, B minor 7, A, something like that. And I was listening to that, and I realized that like 1, 5, 6, 5, and when I went up and checked my guitar, and I was right. And so I would say do that. If I can learn it by mistake, you can learn it on purpose. So, if that's encouragement for you. I said I would speed up these answers, but it doesn't seem to be happening yet. Oh, there's not too many more questions that have gone on so far. Thank you guys for being patient with me. Let me move this chat up a little bit so I can see where it is without having to scroll down. No, don't. There we go. And now I can't scroll through it. Why not? Oh, it's because it says I haven't placed it. Dagnabbit. The chat's freaking out on me. Let me reload the page. Okay, that should be better. Yeah, the chat works now. Sorry about that. Okay, let me read up. So Mitchell Mueller asks, I was just thinking today, has Ongaku Concept took a listen to A Hat in Time's soundtrack? I highly recommend. If you haven't, it's worth a listen even without the game. I've heard about A Hat in Time, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but I was interested in its development. I know Grant Kirkhope is composing for it. Well, no, he composed like a few tracks, didn't he? They had another composer, I think it was. I haven't heard any of the music beyond what I heard in the one trailer song like 2 years ago. So I haven't listened to it yet, but Grant Kirkhope's a pretty decent composer, so I will check that out. So Mauricio Videla is asking, dumb question. There's no dumb questions. I'm just going to say that. What's the proper name for the voicing where you have the third on top? I don't believe... I may be wrong. There may be a classical definition for that, but I don't believe there is a specific name for when you have the third on top of a chord. So Zachary UN is saying, asking, if a piece has F sharp and B flat in the key signature, you can't really say it's in a key, right? My teacher just showed me a piece she's practicing that has that. Well, there's a sort of strange conflation between... it's sort of unfortunate that we use this term in English. We use the word key to mean two different things. So we have key signature, which is the collection of sharps and flats, or not at all, that you see at the start of a score or a piece of sheet music as a guide to help you read. And the reason those are there is not to tell you what the tonal center is or anything like that, at least not traditionally. They're there to make reading easier. So if we're in F sharp major, it's a lot easier to read it if you have 6 sharps in the key signature to say, okay, look, these notes are going to be used fairly frequently. So just, from here on out, keep in mind that these notes are sharp, and then you can read it, and it makes things so much easier to read. That's why they use key signatures. So there's the other definition of key, which is the tonal center of a piece and its tonal gender, so to say. In German and Norwegian, they use, I forget the word exactly, but they use the word gender, essentially, to speak about major and minor keys. So I think that's a really nice summary of that, because we don't really have a word for that here. So there's that definition of key, which is what's its tonal center, and is it major or minor? And so if we might say that a piece is in the key of G major. So let me bring this back around to the idea of modes. We might say that a piece is in the key of G major. but it's using the Mixolydian mode, and the person who wrote out the score decided to use a key signature that conformed to the Mixolydian mode to make things easier to read, so there wasn't any natural signs everywhere by the F. Okay, so we have a key signature with no sharps or flats. Technically speaking, that's the C key signature, but it's in the key of G. So if a piece has F sharp and B flat in the key signature, I would have to hear it to see whether it had a tonal center or not. If it's using F sharp, if it was using F sharp and A sharp very frequently, and decided to make those clear in the score before moving on, then I might assume that it might be an F sharp major. But if it specifies B flat, that suggests that it's using that note in ways that are very different. And so I would assume that it's not in a key. So it depends. So I'm going to mispronounce all of these names, I'm sorry. So Elheno Bodrio is asking, does omitting the third or fifth of a chord sound sad or empty in an emotional level in general? I found a lot of these chords in Earthbound Paula's theme. Thanks, Ongaku, I love your videos. Thank you. I have listened to a bit of Earthbound's soundtrack. It's really nice from what I've heard. I haven't listened to Paula's theme, at least not in a while. I'll have to take a listen to that again. So as for omitting the third or fifth, I guess it depends on how you're going about that, and what register you're in as well. Guitarists often leave out the third in their chords. So they'll play things that we call power chords, which is where you take it's where you take the root of a chord and the fifth, and you just play those. Sometimes we'll add the octave as well. And especially rock and metal guitarists will play those a lot. And the reason for that, and the reason we don't add the third, is because when we're using a lot of distortion, it can make it sort of muddy sounding, and it's not very pleasant. And so we can just play the root in fifth, and we get a very big, bombastic kind of sound. And that's generally the case if you're playing down in the lower ranges. And so, but if you were to play a root, but it certainly doesn't have the third, and so you're going to be missing some of that emotional aspect, because the third is very important in determining the level of extroversion that a chord exudes. I would say that major thirds are more extroverted than minor thirds. Minor thirds are more serious. But if you were to play a root and a fifth way up high in the high ranges, it's going to sound very, very empty. And part of that has to do with the overtone series and the fact that when you get up that high, you're not going to be hearing a lot of those overtones. So it's not going to be kind of filling out the timbre of the chord, and it's going to sound very thin and empty when you're playing up high. So as for omitting the fifth and just having the root and third, maybe it reduces some of the bulk of the chord, because the fifth really adds some stability, some meat to the chord, and so removing that could make it a little bit thinner, I guess. I'd have to hear how it was used. So Jonathan Sned clarified. He said, by split member chords, I mean chords which contain both varieties of a scale degree, such as a major or minor third. Okay, let me double check what he said about. He talked about the functional use of split member chords. Well, it would depend. That's kind of the answer I'm giving for everything, is it depends. I mean, it depends on which notes you're you're using to do that. I mean, if we have a 7 sharp 9 chord, which is a dominant chord with a dominant 7th chord with a sharp 9 added. So if we had a G7 sharp 9, that would be G, B, D, there's your G major triad, F, there's your flat 7, and A sharp, there's your sharp 9. So A sharp and B, if we renamed A sharp to B flat, that's the minor third, and we have the major third, and both of those are present. But the sharp 9 just sounds like a dissonant extension. It doesn't change the function at all. Now, if that's not what you mean, and you mean a situation where a chord, we would actually spell it with both a B flat and a B. It really depends. I'd have to see specific examples. So I promise I'll get to these questions as quickly as I can. But I want to answer as in depth as I can. Let me double check what. Okay, so Ben is asking, how do you get better at hearing individual notes in a chord? So what I like to do is I try and start with the extremes, so like your lowest and highest notes, because those are going to be the easiest to hear. And so you work out, okay, so you're listening to a song, okay, well, I can tell the lowest note's A flat, and the highest one is G. All right. And so from here, you would just start working inwards. And there's a number of ways you can do that. One of them is to guess, and it would be to make educated guesses based on some degree of ear training and some theory knowledge. So say you're in the key of E flat and you have an A flat in the bass, you have a G up high. It's probably an A flat major 7, so that means that C and E flat are likely to show up. Interval training helps as well. If you can hear, you're not sure exactly what the notes are, but you can hear there's a major second in here somewhere because I can feel the tension between those. Okay, well, that narrows down your options, and you can start trying different major seconds until you see one that fits. Or if you can find one of the notes in the chord, try adding a note that's a whole tone away from that in either direction and see if you can find one that fits. So there's a lot of good ways to make educated guesses about the chords you're hearing, about the notes you're hearing. Another thing would be to pay attention to the individual lines being played by the instruments. If you can try and selectively listen to a particular instrument, then it can be a little bit easier to hear which way. So, for example, if you're listening to a piece of music that has a violin and an oboe and a piano, and they're all working things out, and you're like, okay, well, what's the oboe contributing to this chord? Well, pay attention to the oboe and try and screen out everything else and see where is it headed. If you hear it moving downwards before it enters this chord, maybe the note that it's playing is going to be really close, like in a downwards direction from whatever that line is. So say it's playing G, F, E, maybe in the next chord that goes down to an E flat. So it'll be easier to hear if you try and screen out the other things and listen very carefully to one particular instrument. And if that comes with like everything, that comes with time. You'll get better at separating those things the more you practice it, the more you transcribe. I also I forgot to say something about removing the fifth from a chord. It's very common to remove the fifth from chords that are 7th chords or above. And so 7th chords, 9th chords, 11th, 13th. It's common to remove the fifth from those because the fifth can begin to muddy things up there, and it doesn't really add too much to the function. So you can safely leave it out when you're working with big chords like that. Or at least move it to a higher register. So Hex is asking, Are there particular ways to choose a key or a mode when you've got a particular feeling in mind but no melody in your head yet? So, as for a key, so if you mean like choosing a specific tonal center, there are a lot of reasons why you might pick one tonal center over another. If you're writing for real instruments, you may want to pick a tonal center that suits their ranges well. And so if you're writing for a guitar, maybe it's best not to use flat keys. If you want something that's going to be really have like this really open kind of country strumming situation, maybe it's best not to use flat keys, because guitars are not really well suited for flat keys unless you want to tune differently. So you can tune down, put a capo on if you're going to go up. But those are going to affect the timbre as well. So it has to do with, so to some degree, it has to do with just being familiar with your instruments and their ranges and what they sound like in one range versus another. But as far as like a mode or a given like scale or something, when you have a certain feeling in mind, I mean, that's just a matter of getting used to what each one sounds like, what each scale sounds like. Personally, I don't really think about scales well, I would say that pretty much the only time I ever think about scales is when I need to use a linear pattern. Is when I need to go up or down, like a shred part on a guitar or something like that. Otherwise, I really don't think about scales at all. I think about particular scale degrees that I'm interested in using. So flat degrees are going to be darker than raised ones. So if I want something in a major key, so like let's say I want something that's kind of mellow, that's fairly happy but somewhat mellow. There are lots of ways to go about that, not just harmonic but also textural and rhythmic. But approaching it from a harmonic perspective, I might work in a major key to set kind of the bass for that kind of happiness, and then I might flatten a degree here or there. So maybe I'll flatten the 7, or maybe I'll flatten the 6, or maybe both of them, to kind of mellow out the sound. And it depends, because those are going to sound different, and so it's just a matter of getting used to them. It's just a matter of learning what your scale degrees sound like and getting used to how those sound to you and what that brings. And transcription is a good way to do that. You know, you hear a song that has a tone that you want and figure out, okay, well, what's this using? So maybe you set out to compose something and you have a particular song in mind as like a reference. Maybe go take a look at that song and see, okay, is this using any particularly interesting notes? So maybe you'll have a piece that's in a major key that's consistently using the flat 2. So you might look at that and go, okay, that's really interesting, and maybe you can come up with something based around that. So Ben is asking, why does 3 chord, major or dominant, flow easily into a 4 chord? Okay, so that has to do with voice leading. And he's referring to a major 3 chord in a major key in this instance. So say we're in the key of C, then our major 3 chord, since the 3rd degree is E, major chord there would be E major. So it'd be E, G sharp, and B. And so that would flow very well into the 4 chord, which would be F major. So let's say that I'm in C. It's B flat. I go to an E. Now F. But it's this motion in particular that he's talking about. So the reason for that is primarily the G sharp. G sharp is the raised fifth in the key of C, and more importantly, it's the seventh degree of A. So if you think about your leading tones, if you're in the key of C, I shouldn't have put my guitar down too soon. Say you got your C scale, right? You just go in. That note right there wants to go up to C. That's what we call the leading tone. So B, in that case, is what we call the leading tone, because it wants to lead up to C. And every note has a leading tone, in both directions, I should add. And so the leading tone of A is G sharp. So when you add that G sharp into your chord, especially when you're in the key of C, because now this is something to think about. E major is a major chord, you know, and it's going up a semitone to that F major. And so you might look at that and ask, okay, well, why doesn't C major pull to D flat if you're in the key of C? And that's because everything has to be related back to the tonic. Because you can think of the notes as this collection of magnets, if you will. And some of them are going to be stronger than others, and they're going to be, some are going to be stronger than others, and others are going to be weaker than others, both on a large scale and everything compared to your tonal center, and on smaller scales, because all of these notes are going to be related to other notes. So, so your tonal center discerns that. So, for example, A is, so you can think of it kind of like electricity. Certain notes that are going to be very tense want to diffuse that tension in the quickest way possible. Because when electricity runs through something, it's trying to get to the ground as quickly as it possibly can. And so it will take the shortest route it can do so in order to make that happen. And it's kind of the same thing with music. And so so if you have, say, thinking. Say you have an F sharp. You're in the key of C. Say you have an F sharp. Okay. Well, F sharp is a really tense note. It has two directions it can go. It can go up to G, or it can go down to F, natural. It's not going to want to go to F. It's not going to want to go to F because F is a very tense note as well. In jazz, we call it the avoid tone because it's a particularly tense note. However, G is not. G is much more stable than F in the key of C. And so F sharp is going to take the quickest route it can to some level of stability and head up to G. It's going to pull up the G. And so when you have an E major chord, that G sharp wants to go to A. You might ask why it doesn't want to go down to G. That's a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that yet. I would assume that it has something to do with the fact that you have E and B present in the chord, so where those go. So there's an idea you may want to research called secondary dominance. This would be when you have a major chord or a dominant chord other than your 5 chord in a key. So if you have an E major chord in the key of C, that's going to be your 5 of 6. It's going to be your 5 chord of the 6 chord, 6 being A minor. And it works exactly on that principle. You have, first of all, you have the circle of fifths motion, so you have E going to A. You also have G sharp pulling up to A. And so that's why it pulls to F fairly well, because it's pretty much the same kind of motion. You don't have the fifth motion, but you have something very close. You at least have G sharp being fulfilling its role going up to A. So Cosmos Surfer is asking, when you're writing note values, is it better to preserve the beats, like not have a note go through the center of a measure by using a tie instead, or avoid using ties? I would say whatever is easiest to write, not to write, whatever is easiest to read. Because the ultimate goal of notation is to read it. I mean, why else do you write it down other than for you or somebody else to read it later and make sense of what you wrote down? And likely you're writing it so that other people can play it. Or other people can read it and understand it. And so you're going to want to use anything you can to make it easier to read. And then okay, I think it's working now. Where was I? So if you're in a situation where you feel that it would be easier to read something, to have the beat just cut through the have the note cut through a beat somewhere, then I mean, by all means do so. Whatever's easiest to read. So Abraham Rodriguez is asking, do you have... I hope my internet's going to be okay. Hope it doesn't cut out again. So Abraham Rodriguez is asking, do you have any opinion on some of the progressive rock acts in the 70s, like Yes, ELP, King Crimson, etc.? I found these kinds of groups to be very influential for video game soundtracks. I've not listened to hardly any progressive rock. It's not a genre that I was ever very interested in. I know they've certainly influenced a lot of game composers. Motoi Sakuraba, for one. My goodness. A lot of the Gust composers, so Ken Nakagawa, Kazuki Yanagawa, to some degree Hayato Asano. I think he's more pop influenced. But yeah, I mean, I think it certainly has a good representation in game music. So I would definitely look into that if you're interested in I think there's good evidence for its influence in game music, if that's something that you want to look into. But it's not something that I know really anything about. So Renato Nunez is asking, why does Pokemon sound like Pokemon? That's a good question. I suppose it depends on what era of Pokemon you're talking about. Because early Pokemon music really doesn't sound hardly anything like current Pokemon music. And I personally am not very familiar with Pokemon music as a whole. I know some of the Red and Blue stuff. I know more of the X and Y and Sun and Moon stuff, because those are the two games that I've actually played. I've played a bit of Pokemon Blue, but I'm not terribly familiar with it. Let's see. So Ben's asking, you've mentioned in videos before, specifically the first Splatoon video. By the way, I'm planning a second Splatoon video. I want to do one really soon. That modal mixture can help attain a more punk rock kind of sound. Are there any specific trends that help accent this vibe? So assuming that you're talking about punk music, punk is a great genre, man. Yeah, modal mixture for sure. Throw in all your flat fives and your flat sevens and your flat sixes and all that kind of stuff. It's really common in rock to mix the major and minor scales to the point that they're almost indistinguishable from one another. As for more harmonic considerations, power chords are a good thing to look at, because, you know, guitarists, like I said, we play power chords all the time. And I haven't studied enough punk to really be able to say much about I haven't studied enough punk to really be able to say very much about its rhythmic aspects. But that's all I can say about the harmonic aspects for right now. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted by something. So Criminal Bunny asks, how do you learn to recognize chords by ear? So I already answered this question earlier on in the stream. It was like maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes into the stream, maybe a bit earlier. And I don't think I'm going to make the stream public, but I will post it in the Ongaku Concept Discord if you want to have a look at that after this is over. But in short, it has to do with training your relative pitch. So apply numbers to your notes and your chords. So don't think of F in C as F. Think of it as 4, and so on and so forth. So Zach Murray is asking, you compose your own music, right? If so, do you have any of it available anywhere? Yes, I do. I've composed for one game, a mobile game, and I also I'm currently composing for some other games that I can't really talk about right now. And I don't know if those are ever going to see the light of day, but hopefully so. But primarily, I work on my own concept albums. And specifically, there's a project that I'm working on called Looking Glass of the Heart, which is it started out as kind of a concept album for like a something of like a slice of life anime kind of soundtrack, and it eventually developed into something of a story. And I've been working very heavily on that, and I still have a lot of plans for that I'm currently working on. Lots of songs that I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, about my future plans right now, because those aren't very clearly set. But yeah, so I do a lot of that. If you want to find it, you can find it on my Bandcamp page, which I'll just put the link in the chat for you. I play a lot of rock music, but most of the stuff I write is more akin to British light music. It's one of my favorite genres. Let's see. So Sean O'Brien says, left the channel, man. As a guitarist and music student looking to get into film composition, your videos have been very insightful and interesting to watch. Look forward to more content. Thank you very much. I'm very glad that you find them helpful. So Zach Murray is asking, what's your schedule like as far as making videos, studying, and practicing? Well, I don't exactly have much of a schedule. I'll say that. I'm not the most industrious individual. But I certainly don't practice on a regular basis. I just kind of, my practice is kind of just playing whatever songs I want, really. To be fair, I can already play pretty much most of what I want to play on the guitar, and I really don't have any interest in further developing my technical ability right now. At least it's a low priority. I have a higher interest in prioritizing other pursuits, like composition and such. Let's see, let me scroll down. So Sage asks, are you going to talk about the Made in Abyss OST? I've heard a lot about that anime, and I've heard that it's very good. I have not heard any of the music, so... But I should take a listen to that. We'll see. Oh, it seems like I've caught up with the questions. If anyone has further questions to ask, I'm perfectly happy to answer them. And like I said before, I don't think that there are any dumb questions. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask something that might make you sound stupid. Because, geez, man, asking is the furthest thing from being stupid, because it means that you're trying to learn something and you're trying to further your knowledge. That's the exact opposite of acting stupid. So it's something to value. So Sean is asking, you mentioned that you had written for a mobile game. How did this opportunity come about? So the developer, I can't remember, Dream On Studios, that's the name of his company. I think he's based in Sweden? Sweden, Italy, I think it is. It's kind of irrelevant to the question. So he emailed me, kind of out of the blue one day. He said he had found Ongaku Concept and had been looking through that, hoping to try and make some music for a game he was working on. And when he found that it was a little bit harder to do than he had previously anticipated, he thought that he might as well just contact me and see if I was up for composing for it. And that was really fun. That was a really fun project to do. So Ben's asking, would you say it's better to compose in notation software or in a DAW, like on a piano roll? I mean, it depends on your workflow and what your intentions are with. I mean, I think if you're asking about studying music, I really think it's best to study music by writing it out through like actual notation instead of a piano roll, because that way you have grammar and you can and that I think is really, really helpful to understanding music theory. But as far as just composing, it depends. I've done both. I've worked in a notation software to get my ideas down, and then I moved to a DAW and start working things out. But a lot of times I'll just work straight in the DAW and just work with the piano roll. It depends on your process. I mean, if you have music that you want to be played by live musicians, maybe it would be best to work in notation software so that you have the scores prepared for them to play. One benefit, by the way, of working in notation software is that you probably have fairly low quality sounds. I call that a benefit because I think it's very helpful to work with low quality sounds, because that way you're not distracted by trying to get because the higher quality sounds you have, the more definition is in them, and so the more you can kind of mess with that and go, okay, well, this isn't quite right, let me just tweak the frequencies here, whatever. And that's sound design basically, and that's all well and good, but I think when you're trying to compose, that kind of gets in the way. At least for me, it's something that gets in the way quite a lot. And so I find that it's helpful in some situations to try and compose with very low resolution sounds first, and that can be in a notation editor or it can be in something else. Depends. So I would say just think about your own process and what seems to be the most efficient for you, and work from there. Lately, I've been composing mostly straight in a DAW, because I've been taking basic ideas and just trying to play piano to kind of flesh those out, and I do that in the DAW, and so it makes it easy for me to kind of tweak things as I go. And so Fridge is asking, what do you think of? Oh, by the way, hi Charles. Yeah, Mixolydian Sharp 7. I laughed when I saw that on Twitter. I haven't heard that joke before. Lydian Flat 4. So Fridge is asking, what do you think of ear training programs like Functional Ear Trainer? Would it be better to just transcribe a ton to train the ear instead of using training apps? I can't say I have much personal experience with ear training programs, and so I can't really judge them too specifically, but I can say that most of those programs are going to be focusing on getting you used to hearing intervals, melodic and harmonic intervals, chords, scales, maybe chord progressions or melodies, try and memorize a melody and work out the intervals and stuff like that. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that sort of thing. I think it's beneficial to work with... I think there are more benefits to transcription than there are to using a program like that. I don't want to discourage people from using those sorts of programs if they have access to them. But I think that there are probably more benefits to transcription. And the reason I say that is, number one, you're hearing chords and notes in real-world applications. And so instead of hearing just a MIDI piano or something like that, you're hearing chords and notes with whole clusters of instruments, or real recordings and things that are like actual. Because I mean, it's a very different experience to get used to working out chords on a guitar, and then you go to a piano. It's going to be a lot harder because you're not used to it. So same thing if you're working out stuff with MIDI data and you switch to like working out real songs, it's going to be a bit harder. So I would say maybe do that right off the bat and get yourself in real world situations. And another benefit that I think is particularly important with transcription is the fact that you're writing it down. And they say that like one of the best ways to learn something or memorize it is to get a pen and paper and write it down. And I think that's true with music as well. If you write something down, first of all, you're going to memorize it more. You're going to have it a little more ingrained into your memory. And you'll also be able to see, like, visually how it's laid out on a score. And that'll teach you more about writing music, like notation, and about the grammar of all of that. And so you're working at a lot of different things all at once when you're working with transcription. You're also dissecting pieces of music and figuring out, okay, because maybe you're only transcribing a guitar part, but here's what you are doing. You were learning, not only are you training your ear, but you're also learning what a guitar sounds like in different ranges, how a guitar part is written, how this particular guitar part is playing with the rest of the song. So I think there's a lot of benefits to transcription that make it preferable, in my opinion. So Quirt11 is asking, how do you go about analyzing metal music where things are very riff-based and don't often have clear functional chord changes? That's a really good question. And it's something I've been thinking about a little bit lately, especially as I've been analyzing the Splatoon 2 music, and the video that I'm planning on that is going to go into that to some degree. But I would say there's kind of two types of riffs. You have the riffs that are very ornamental and embellishing of basic chords, And so, say I took, you might be familiar with Crush 40's Live and Learn from Sonic Adventure 2. It's the main theme of that game. And the chorus has this riff that just goes. And what that's doing is it's a very embellished, ornamented description of a C sharp minor 7, A add 9, E over G sharp, F sharp major. That's the progression. And it's basically outlining that through the thing. And so you'll have riffs like that, and then you'll have riffs that aren't really outlining any chords at all. And so the thing to remember about that is that chords are just containers. So a chord is really just a container of notes that happen to harmonize fairly frequently together. That happen to coincide together very often. But it's actually made up of individual notes. And so I would say to look at the way the notes are moving. You can think of it sort of in a classical, like a 4-part harmony kind of way, is like maybe some of those will combine to form chords, but what you're really looking at is you have these individual sorts of melodies that are playing along and intertwining with one another. And I think that's how you should look at it. If you find something that's where you can't really hear much of chord progression in it. So Zachary's asking, do you think you should study different genres of music to expand your knowledge of music theory, or just play the genre that you like the most? Well, I think that depends on what you're looking to get out of it. I mean, certainly, if you're looking to learn more about seventh chords and altered dominant chords, maybe punk music isn't the best place to look. I mean, if you're looking, punk and pop music, that sort of thing, it's not the best place to look if you want to learn about those things. So it really depends on what you want to get out of it and what you want to learn. You should consider what it is that you want to learn as well. You may be interested in studying theory for its own sake, and I think that's perfectly fine. I prefer to study theory from a more practical perspective. And so I try and study things that I feel that I can put to use in some way. And if you feel that you're not getting what you would like out of whatever genre that you tend to listen to most frequently, then look into other genres, or if you're just curious to see what else is out there, definitely look at other genres and see what you can find. But if you're only interested in learning music that conforms very specifically to whatever genre that you're in, then I don't think there's any problem in sticking with that. But it's certainly worth, even if you think that you're only going to play one genre for the rest of your life, I think it's still worth taking the time to consider looking at other genres. Tom Morello is the guitarist for Rage Against the Machine. His guitar playing style is very heavily influenced by hip-hop vocalists, actually, which is a very interesting place to take inspiration from as a guitar player. But he was interested in that kind of music and blending some of that, taking influence from that with his own playing. Alan Holdsworth is a jazz guitarist. He died a few months ago, I believe. he was never terribly interested in being a guitar player, but that's kind of what he became to be known for. And so he always preferred the trumpet, actually. And so he took ideas from the trumpet to see how he could make his guitar playing sound a little bit more like that. And one of the things that he developed through that line of reasoning was his very particular legato technique. I'm not going to explain that, but I'm saying that it's worth looking into other genres just to see what you can get out of it, just if you're curious. But I don't think it's a necessity. So I think you should think about what you want to learn and see if whatever genre you are studying is providing that for you. So Daft Dragons is asking, do you think the appreciation of harmony is learned? Could someone be raised to enjoy dissonances as we enjoy harmony? I would assume so, yeah. I mean, Rick Beato really likes his intro music, and I personally can't stand it. It's far too chaotic for my taste. Way too chaotic, especially the last chord, which I don't like at all. But that's just how I hear it, because I'm not, used to playing C and D flat major together all the time, But there are chords that I find really, really nice, that other people might not. So I think that certainly can be developed, an appreciation for more dissonance. And I'm sure what you're raised on probably has a lot to do with that and what your tastes are. So... There's something I was thinking about. I don't remember what it was. Some topic. The Splatoon video I'm planning is going to be really fun. So Zachary's asking, can I ask what your favorite game is right now? Splatoon 2. I've been playing that a lot. I don't really play video games very often. Part of it is kind of a lack of systems. I mean, I have a Mac, so I can't really play most games which are on PC. I have Windows now, but the other part of it is just like lack of time. Not to say a lack of time, but just that I'm more interested in putting time towards other things, and so but I've been playing a lot of Splatoon 2 lately. That's a game that I really, really enjoy. So Daft Dragon says, I want to start arranging music for a cappella, but my music theory background is just beginning. What can I do to begin arranging? Start arranging. Just start and see what you find, I don't think that you need to have any conscious understanding of music theory before you start composing, because you already do understand some level of music theory. Even if you don't know what a key is, even if you don't even know what a chord is, you've listened to music in your life, probably for most of your life, considering that music is everywhere. And so you're going to have some basic idea of kind of what sounds good and what doesn't to you. And so I would just say start writing. Start transcribing for sure. Transcribe songs that you're interested in. And another thing to do, by the way, I think transcription is very valuable and very important, and I recommend transcribing songs whenever possible, but especially if you're just starting out, just find scores, find songs that other people have transcribed, or you can buy like a book of sheet music or something. There's a lot of websites that sell sheet music for songs that you like, and start studying those scores and see what you can find. Maybe start applying, so you have some ideas that you like, and so see if you can apply some of those ideas to what you're writing. And I talked to Hajime Hyakaku, I think it was last year. He is an anime composer. He works for, I forget the name, FMF is the name. They're a music production company in Japan, and they produce music primarily for anime. So Hyakuku is one of their composers. He's known for working on K-On! He did the background music in that anime. New Game. What else is there? Sayakano. GJ Boo. He's one of my favorite composers. I talked to him, and I asked him that question. I asked, is there... I did ask him that particular question, but I asked if he had any advice for new composers, and one of the things that he said was to listen to music that you like and try and break it down and work out exactly what's going on. So transcribe it, basically. He used the word recreate, to kind of recreate the song. And then, after you've done that, write your own song based on the ideas in that. And then you just do that over time, and you will begin to develop your own style, because certain things that kind of stick to you will continue to come out in your writing. And as you amass a lot of that, you form something that's entirely unique. That's something to think about, is originality. Originality is not coming up with stuff that's never ever been done before, because you can't, really. Anything you come up with is going to be something that either somebody else has already done before, or just hasn't done in the or has done in some form. I mean, when Van Halen got famous for doing like tapping on the guitar, that wasn't a new technique. First of all, people were tapping long before him. Just nobody really did that in rock guitar so much. And in addition, it wasn't an entirely new technique to begin with. He watched videos of like music videos of Jimmy Page, and he saw him doing like the hammer-on pull-offs to the open note, and he thought, what if I just use this hand to do that, and then use my other hand and move that open note around? And that's basically what tapping is. And so originality is taking things that have already been used and combining them in ways that might not be so common. So I would say not to worry too much about being original. You just write what you like, and I think it eventually... Because here's the thing to think about, is that you are not going to be very original when you first start writing. It's just not going to happen. Because you can't help but not copy other people when you're just starting out. Because, what do you know how to... Like, what do you know about writing music when you're just starting out? You don't. And so you're going to copy other people in a lot of ways, and more than you think you will. Because that's all you can do to some degree to make anything listenable. And so, but over time, as you become more independent, and that's kind of a necessary part of the process, and over time you become more independent, and you'll start to amass little bits and pieces of inspiration from many different composers. And so if you want to become more original, broaden the amount of music that you listen to, genres and things like that. What if the villain theme is? So somebody mentioned. Big question is when will Warp Zone 10 mentioned. The big question is when will we see the first proper fully 12-tone game soundtrack? The bad guy's main theme will be the retrograde version, inversion of the good guys. I've actually thought about that before. I was developing an idea for a concept album, and I had the idea that the villain's theme would be an inversion of the hero's theme. I never really went anywhere with that, though. I still want to someday. So Zachary's asking, what genre did you say was your favorite? British light music. So light music was a genre that originates in the early 20th century, and really between the 1910s, 20s to about the 60s is kind of when its golden era was. And the basic idea is that it's sort of stripped down, less serious orchestral music, thus the term light music. So you'll have little pieces of orchestral music that were very short. By short, I mean like 10 minutes or less, because most orchestral music is much longer than that. Played by small ensembles, so you have chamber ensembles, maybe 20 people. I don't know what the official number for chamber ensembles is, but it's not very many, relatively speaking. There's an emphasis on through composition, so that would be composing in a sort of A to B manner with little to no repetition of sections, among other things. And I want to do a video on that because it has links to Japanese music in ways that you probably won't be able to guess, and I think it's really interesting. But yeah, it's my absolute favorite genre of music to write. That's for sure. I really, really love it. It's a very cozy genre to write in. I like it a lot. So Court11 is asking, is there a particular genre you can't stand no matter how many times you hear it? Modern atonal classical music. That's a very broad statement, and I could probably find pieces of music, within. It's not really a genre, but I don't like music that doesn't have much order to it. I like music that has some clear established direction. And so I don't like much atonal stuff. At least music that doesn't appear to have much of a direction to me. That's partly why I don't like most of Rick Beato's like the intro and some of the pieces that he shows off in his videos, is because the intense dissonance is too lacking in order for me. It's also why I don't like Mickey Mousing. Mickey Mousing is a type of is a composing process that where each musical movement is, I say movement, like each note and each chord and things like that is assigned with a particular action. And so it's used on screen. And you'll see that in old Mickey Mouse cartoons and Looney Tunes cartoons as well, where each note or whatever is lining up with an action, and that's a wonderful way of composing. But I don't enjoy it because I don't enjoy listening to it. Like I think it deserves a lot of respect. I don't think I could compose that way. It certainly takes a great degree of skill, but both on the composer's part and the performers. But it's not a genre that I enjoy. It's hard to call it a genre. It's not a compositional form that I enjoy, because it's zoomed in too closely for me, where I'm getting hit with so much information that it's overwhelming in a way. So Vince is asking for musical cliches that you just can't stand. It hurt me to play that. So I don't like that progression very much. I think it can be used very, very well, very effectively. There are a few pieces. Go Go Toturi from the Atelier Toturi soundtrack by Ken Nakagawa. That's one in particular that I think is an incredible example of that progression at use at work. But I think most people use it in a superficial manner, where it's kind of just being thrown out there without any depth. And I don't like that at all. Do I have a favorite Beatles song? I haven't listened to a lot of Beatles music, but of the little bit that I have, I think I know the name of the song, but let me just double check. Okay. In My Life. I really like that song. I think the harmonic direction and everything, the melody, like all of that, like it's very orderly. It's very strong. And I like it's very cohesive to me, and I like it a lot. So Mo Senko says, "Hey Joshua, I'm composing something at the moment, and I'm having trouble creating the sweeping strings kind of feeling." Guess you have to clarify what you mean by that. Because there's the idea. I mean, are you talking about like in light music, in British light music? There's an idea of something of like a waterfall of strings that is basically where each row of like the string section will delay their part by like a fraction of a second. So it just comes off as like this cascade of players, doing that. So maybe it has something to do with the way you're writing it. Maybe it has something to do with the performances or the way you're programming it if you're using a library of strings or something like that. So hard to say. So Court 11 says, on the other hand, are there any cliches that you love every time? Besides the Royal Road, obviously. I do love the Royal Road. There are situations where I think it's annoying, where it is used superficially. And the more used to it I become, the more I notice more superficial uses of it, and I get a little more annoyed by that. But as for cliches that I really love, I don't know. I think a cliche is not so much a I want to do a video on this. It's hard for me to answer that question because I don't think a cliche is really a thing that exists so much as it is a form of writing. So I would say cliches are something of a dishonest way of writing, and it has little to do with what you were using, like with what your chord progressions are or whatever, and more the way you're using it. So hard to say. So New 3 is asking, do you ever have problems with consistency versus variety on a project? I tend to either end up with boring and samey songs or interesting ones that don't fit together. That's definitely a good thing to consider when you're working on a soundtrack, and especially if you aspire to be a game composer or a film composer or whatever, somebody who works on a piece of media that needs a consistent sound across it. That's something that you have to keep in mind. I don't think I have too much of a problem with consistency in that regard. I mean, maybe if I had a project where I had to write 200 songs or something for it, maybe it would be. But I mean, you know, in working on Looking Glass, I've written. There were like 33 songs in the original concept album that I did. 19 songs in the official album that I did for like the story itself. I'm working on more. I mean, so I haven't written a ton of songs for that project, but I've written a fair amount, and I haven't had really any trouble keeping a consistent sound. I think consistency in a soundtrack really has a lot to do with your instrumentation and the way that you're recording and mixing the parts. So I think as long as it's really about choosing your palette more than anything. I think a little bit more than like how you're exactly composing it. Even though there is some of that, I think it has more to do with like the palette that you've chosen for your instruments as a whole, and the way you're mixing them. And that's why I'm a member of the Material Collective, and it's a group that remixes video game music, and they also anyway. But so we'll have like giant remix album projects, and so we'll have an album with like 100 tracks all by different people, and but we have a single mastering engineer, so he just goes through and masters all the tracks so that they sound roughly similar in tone. That's why you have a single mastering engineer for albums, is for that reason. So Court is also asking, what's the last song you heard and fell completely in love with? I don't remember. I'll link you one. I don't know if it was the most recent one. It probably wasn't, but it's the most recent that I can think of at the moment. Ripstream. So the stream cut out for a second, but Court was asking, what's the last song you heard and completely fell in love with? I don't know what the most recent was, but the most recent that I can remember is New Future Weapon by Billy Idol. I've been listening to a lot of Billy Idol lately, and I really like that song a lot. So Vince said, speaking of film composers, what's a film score that you absolutely enjoy? Let's exclude Joe Hisaishi for fairness. I've not really heard. I've never watched a Ghibli movie, and I don't know much of Hisaishi music, so it's kind of excluded by default. But I will show you my absolute favorite. Let me look this up on YouTube. I'll put the link in the chat. My favorite soundtrack, my favorite film score of all time is the soundtrack to The Secret Garden, the film adaptation, the 1993 film adaptation of The Secret Garden, and I'm gonna butcher this name, but it was composed by Zbigniew Przesnir. He's a Polish composer, and the soundtrack is it's very minimal, really minimal. Most of the tracks have like maybe 2 or 3 instruments at best, and almost all of them are solo instruments. So it's not a giant ensemble or anything like that. So it gives it first of all, it's a very unique sound. It's not a sound that's used in film scores hardly ever. I don't think I've ever heard a soundtrack that sounds quite like this. Secondly, it's a very intimate sound, and because of its minimal approach, every texture and every note and every choice has a lot more weight, and so it feels a lot more personal, and that's something that I value quite a lot in the music that I make, and influences what I listen to a lot of the time. And it's part of what attracts me to light music, is because of the smaller ensembles and it's a more intimate setting. So Giorgio Lambos is asking, have you seen the 97 adaptation of Berserk? I have not. And Ben's asking, top 5 video game soundtracks. Majora's Mask, Chrono Trigger, Animal Crossing New Leaf, Spiral Knights, Spiral Knights is a multiplayer online game produced by Three Rings, and it was distributed by Sega. The composer was Harry Mack, Harrymack, and he does an exceptional job at striking a balance between memorability and functionality. So a lot of the music that for like the stages in that game is fairly ambient, but it also has really memorable melodies, and the way he arranges is fascinating. I forget the word for this, but he basically passes melodies from instrument to instrument, and they kind of develop in that way, and it's really incredible. And I think it's certainly one of my, as for games that are not well known, it's certainly one of my favorite soundtracks from a game that most people would not know of. And I think it's worth checking out. If you want to check out one song in particular, I would recommend looking at. This isn't terribly representative of most of the game's music, but I would say to look up "Boot Up," which is the music for when you are at your more or less the home menu, and it's really, the way the melody develops in that is incredible. Let's see, that was for. I should say a little bit about the other soundtracks. Majora's Mask, just everything is fitting. Kondo, I respect Kondo so much as a composer, because of just how intentional he is. And I think Majora's Mask, he was very, very careful about exactly what he was doing, and everything just fits so well. Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is just like very fantastical, and has a lot of memorable melodies and stuff like that. In particular, there was spoiler alert. There's the first time you go to what is it, 2300 AD, and you step out of that base and you see the map for the first time, and everything is just covered in snow, and it's all wrecked. First thing you hear is this really low piano note, and I remember seeing that, and like I felt like my heart sink when I saw that. That was a really impactful moment, and it's really incredible. Another instance, I don't know if Charles is still here, but he can attest to this because I was in a call with him when this happened. I was playing Chrono Trigger, and I came across the what's it called? The kingdom with like the floating kingdom. And that's where Corridors of Time plays. And I had heard Corridors of Time before, but I hadn't seen where it was from. And so hearing that music paired with that visual, because I was going into this game fairly blind, like I was talking to Charles, and I saw that, and I stopped, and I just stared at my screen. I just kind of like was captivated by it for like a solid 2 minutes before I said anything. Chrono Trigger is a very meaningful game, and I think the music in it is very meaningful as well. Animal Crossing New Leaf, I think. So Animal Crossing New Leaf, that soundtrack was done by Manaka Kataoka. You might know her as the primary composer for Breath of the Wild, and she was the primary composer for Animal Crossing New Leaf as well. That's another soundtrack where it's a very minimalist soundtrack, and it's I think it sets the tone of the game really, really well. I would personally, I would say better. It fits the Animal Crossing vibe a little bit better than the original Animal Crossing soundtrack. But I think the original Animal Crossing soundtrack is a little bit too electronic, in my opinion. Or multiple instances. Oh shoot, the stream is offline again. Is it working? Maybe? Yeah, it is. Okay. So Pokemon Sun and Moon, that would be it. I'm gonna pick that one as my fifth because that was another situation where the music. There were several instances where the music impacted me in some way. One of those being Acerola's Trial, where going into this haunted like supermarket, abandoned supermarket, and it's like it's kind of making fun of itself, like, oh, this could be so scary, and I remember thinking to myself, it's kind of sad that they can't, in a game like this, they're not gonna be able to make it like really scary in some way. So I step in there, and when I hear this music that's like cutting out and like glitching and stuff, I actually thought something was wrong with my DS at first, and that kind of brought some concern to me, and then when I realized it was actually part of the music, I thought that was really clever that they were still able to inspire some degree of concern or anxiety in a sort of roundabout way, and that's really impressive. So, Radical Larry says, "Hey Josh, what is your favorite track from K-On? I know you pull a lot of inspiration from that show." Yeah. My favorite instrumental piece of music from that show would be Fine Rain in the Afternoon. It's off the second volume of the soundtrack of the second season of the show. Composed by Hajime Hyakuku. But I can list countless amazing pieces of music from the soundtrack. As far as the vocal music goes, probably anything on Hokago Tea Time's second. That would be my second favorite rock album, with my first favorite being Thrill of the Field by Crush 40. So Pure Heart, Honey Sweet Tea Time, those are both really solid. Favorite track? You know what? I'm going to be right back. Just give me a second. Okay, we're back. So Court 11 asks, favorite tracks from Sonic Mania? Chemical Plant Zone Act 2. Green Hill Zone Act 2. Special stage music. The boss music. Titanic Monarch Act 1. Yeah. Those are my favorites. So Jack Hartland asks, how do you get... I'm assuming he asks, how did I get into video game composing? Unless he's asking, how do you get into that field? Which I would say, I don't know. But if he's asking how I did get into game composing, I mean, I've just always been interested in games, and I've always had a passive interest in music. But when I was a teenager and I started playing guitar, I started listening to a lot of 80s rock music, and I started playing the guitar, and that's when I got more actively interested in music, and then I decided one day randomly on a whim to look up the Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 soundtracks, because I had forgotten what they sounded like, and I was like, I wonder what these are like. Let me just look them up for old times. So I find, hey, look, all this crazy 80s rock kind of inspired music, and so and that was, oh, come on, the stream is offline again. There we go, it's working. And that kind of music was like aligned very heavily with the kind of stuff that I was listening to at the time, and so, you know, I just kept listening to game music, and one thing led to another, and it's basically all I listen to now. Okay, I will say that, but also storytelling. As I've gotten older, I've found a heavier interest in storytelling as a whole. And I like the idea of telling stories with music. And so I think that's what draws me to game music quite a lot. So this user, whose name is like two of those, whatever you call it, like the straight line that they use for like, don't even remember the term now, whatever. He's asking, if you could join a team that writes the score for a game, which game would you want it to be? Well, I really prefer to work alone. Honestly, I work better alone. But that's kind of irrelevant to the question. So, as for what type of game I would want it to be, anything where I could put my interest in writing light music to work. So likely a visual novel, or a maybe an RPG. Maybe something like a sim, something like along the lines of Animal Crossing, that kind of stuff. Anything where I can write that kind of music is something that's really that I would be interested in doing. Favorite discount Idolmaster song. So I called Love Live Discount Idolmaster as a joke in one of my videos. So what's my favorite Love Live song? I haven't heard a huge amount of Love Live music. My favorite would probably be, at the moment, my favorite would be, what's it called? Guilty Kiss or something like that. It's the one that it's the one with those like inverted, like the augmented chords with like the ninth and the bass. Like that one, that was really, really cool. I think of the little that I've heard, the Akur stuff is a lot more interesting to me than the Muse stuff. Although Snow Halation's pretty good. I would say a lot of that music is very cliche. Because the whole show kind of is. But I do enjoy... Thank you, yes, Guilty Eyes Fever. Todokete. Ben's asking if I can give an example of a terrible game or anime that has an amazing soundtrack. Any Sonic game ever. For a more specific example, there's an anime called True Tears, which has a somewhat nonsensical plot and kind of a disappointing one as well. And I don't think the anime is all that great. But the soundtrack and the atmosphere that it provides for the show is really impressive. And I would say it's one of the soundtracks that has left one of the biggest impacts on me as a composer. Even though I didn't really consider it to be that at the time, because, you know, the first time I watched Kinero Mosaic, like the first episode, that first episode just completely changed my life as a composer, and I mean that seriously, because the soundtrack, that is... So British light music has a lot of influence on anime music as a whole, but I mean, the Kinero Mosaic soundtrack was very heavily tilted in that direction, and that just... I completely fell in love with that sound right then, and that's all I'd ever wanted to compose since I was 4 years ago. And so there are some situations where it's kind of like, well, yeah, I know like instantly, like this is a very important moment in my life, but an important soundtrack or song, whatever. But with True Tears, it's not something that I really thought at the time. It was just like, here's this nice soundtrack, and here's this anime that's, it's okay, but it's, whatever. But I'd say the soundtrack really did have a big influence on me over time. So Chopsticks, thank you, is asking, is the guy with the name that was just like the 2 lines. Where does your writing process start? For example, I usually begin by accidentally playing something that sounds good on piano. Also, do you write on a piano roll or staff paper or something else? It depends. Ideally, I will have some idea in my head to begin with. A lot of my songs start that way. It just starts as some idea in my head. And sometimes that idea is just a melody. Sometimes it's a chord progression. Sometimes it's a completely fully arranged section, piece of music. So ideally, it starts as an idea that's already in my head, and so I can just work that out and just go from there. And something I try to do is if possible, I try not to play things too much. I try to... Because my head's going to come up with a lot better, for me at least, my head's going to come up with a lot better stuff than my fingers will. So I try to just kind of maybe sit on my hands so I don't touch the piano and just let my mind wander while thinking of so I would say that the writing process always starts with a scenario in mind, or a picture of some kind. because I need to be able to see exactly what's going on. Because again, like I said, I really think of writing music as a form of storytelling, and so I want to have something, some setting in mind that I can work from. And so I want to know what the environment's like. What's the weather like? You know, what does everything feel like to walk on or to touch? What mood is the person in? What perspective am I writing it from? Am I writing it from that character's perspective or an onlooker or something else? And I don't really think about those questions consciously unless I'm stuck. It kind of happens, but it's sort of behind the scenes, almost literally, I guess, if I'm gonna keep going with that metaphor. So once I have an idea, then I'll just, first of all, try and write that out. Sometimes I'll write that out on mute. So I have my computer muted and I just put in the notes. And by the way, I used to work with a notation editor most of the time. Now I usually work in a DAW. It depends. But I'll just put down the notes, and usually I'll mute my audio while I do that. I just rely on relative pitch. Pick a key and then just rely on relative pitch and get that down. So that way I don't hear anything or hear myself play a wrong note and kind of mess up the idea. And then I'll just work from there and see what kind of inspiration I can get. And if I get stuck, I'll usually try and ask myself pointed questions about how to resolve it. So like, okay, well, this sounds wrong. Okay, but why? Why does it sound wrong? Is there something missing? Is there something that's too much? Is there something clashing? How is it clashing? Is it clashing rhythmically or harmonically or both or texturally? Does the texture sound like it's too much of the same and needs more variation? Okay, well, maybe that's it. All right, well, maybe I can change one of these instruments to something else, or maybe I can have this instrument be played in a different manner than the others. Maybe I can take this instrument out and replace it with a different one that has a different texture that'll contrast more with the rest of it. So I try and do that. But if I'm not getting anywhere with that, then I'll go back to letting my mind wander and see if it can come up with some better ideas. So Christopher Adams asks, I'm by the way, I'm only going to answer like a few more questions. So I have time to relax and stuff before I go to bed. Christopher Adams is asking, have you heard any other music using quintal and quartal harmony that you love? I'm searching for lots of examples of quintal harmony. I have not heard too many examples of that in use. Considering you said any other music, I assume that you saw my video on Breath of the Wild, which has some instances of that are really nice. So there's that. But aside from that, I haven't really heard much, no. Court 11 asks, have you explored microtonal concepts? What do you think of stuff like just intonation or 15-tone equal temperament? The temperament question is a bit too involved for me to go into right now. As far as microtonal concepts go, no, I haven't studied them hardly at all. I'm not really interested in that kind of music. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not a very good pianist at all either. I mean, probably the limit of my skill level is playing like the Song of Healing from Majora's Mask. That's about the best I can do. I have a couple videos on my main YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Joshua Typely, of me playing piano, and it's obvious that I really can't play anything other than very slow, simple music. But yeah, like, I mean, whatever, right? Maybe we're not good pianists, but like, it's enough to kind of get ideas out, right? And aiding in programming stuff. So, I mean, you know, it's certainly enough to be helpful. do I have any creative triggers in composition? Like like extreme sleep deprivation, strong emotions, or drugs. So I don't do drugs, and I have no interest in doing so. Partly because of fear of developing any kind of dependency on those sorts of things. Also a lack of interest, and my body's very sensitive as a whole to think like I can't have too much caffeine, for example. I get, super jittery after just like a soda. So, it's not something that I think is wise for me to do. But but to actually be on topic, I don't tend to emote very strongly. I'm, for the most part, so I would say no, I don't think that strong emotions are very... Another thing is that when I feel very strongly about something, I can make poor decisions in a composition, and so I actually prefer to work when I'm not feeling particularly motivated. It depends. It depends. I mentioned Looking Glass of the Heart, which is a side project of mine. So the album, The Concept of Love, which is kind of the main soundtrack for that. The title, the first track is called To Gloucestershire, and it's a medley of tracks. And the intro for that, which is like this really ambient kind of piano thing that's messing about with these big ninth chords and stuff. That was composed in a very strongly emotional moment. I had been listening to the soundtrack to The Garden of Words. I forget the name of the composer. But it just kind of put me in a mood that I don't know how to describe, but I think you would understand it if you heard the music. And so it was a very quiet mood, and it felt like everything and all my thoughts were tinted by some kind of a color. No color in particular, but just that's a metaphor for how it felt. So it was kind of like this cloud hanging over me, not a negative one per se, but a cloud, where everything outside of me was kind of dulled, and my mind was kind of centered on this one particular mood, and so I wrote that intro with that mindset. And I think that was very useful because that track in particular, I was having a lot of trouble composing, and that kind of gave me the kickstart that I needed to do that. And so that was really useful for me. So yeah, I mean, but another thing is that I feel that emotion can lead me to make unwise decisions at times. So for example, the most recent public song, because there are other songs that I've completed that I have not released yet. The most recent public song that I've completed for Looking Glass is a song called Reverie of a Child, which is a theme for a character named Nadia. And she's a very aloof sort of character who's kind of in her own head a lot of the time. And she was really interesting to write for. But so her main theme, which you can just go to my... there's a preview of that song on my YouTube channel, and and you can hear the full thing on the Looking Glass website where the story is, and you can find that link again. It's the pinned tweet on my Twitter. If you just twitter.com/Joshua Typley, if you go there. So that piece of music is sort of ethereal in tone, and as I was composing it, one of my emotions, I guess, were kind of screaming at me to build the intensity and have it go into like this really sweeping like string section. But I pushed that down, and I had to do that consistently throughout the piece because it wouldn't have fit the character. It just wasn't fitting for the character. And so I had to restrain myself as I was composing to write in a way that was fitting for what I was trying to express. And I think that's a useful skill to develop. Or it's not really a skill, it's just more of an awareness to have. Especially when you're writing for particular scenarios or characters or whatever, in my opinion. As for other creative triggers, artwork is one of them. I'm really inspired by really nice art. Just anything that I can see and form, like, get an idea of like a scenario or something that's going on, I always try, like I said, I always try and get a picture in my head when I'm composing, and so that's really helpful. Radical Larry is asking a somewhat similar question. What's your process on coming up with lyrics? I remember hearing that song from your first concept album and was impressed with the lyrics. Thank you. I don't think many people have heard that. That is the first and only, and, well, I wouldn't say last, but it's the only one so far that I've written lyrics for. And I personally don't think that they were great, but I am proud of what I accomplished with that. I'm really pleased with the way the music turned out, at least. Not the performance so much, but just the composition. I like it a lot. Not to like pat myself on the back or anything like that. I like the way it turned out. But really, I don't enjoy writing lyrics at all. It's not something I'm practiced at, and it's not something that I really know how to do. So I can't say really how to have a process. That song in particular, the song he's talking about is a song called "What Color Is Love," and it was the second to last track on an album called In Wonderland, which was the initial spark of what eventually became the Looking Glass project. And that song had these lyrics, and the way that happened was I just randomly had an idea for, it was just the beginning melody was like da 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 da, that kind of thing, and there was that first lyric that came to mind with that. And I never get ideas for a melody with lyrics, but for some reason lyrics came into mind, and so I just kind of took that and I wrote it down, and I just decided to sit there for a couple hours and worked that out. And so within a couple hours, that was done. So that was an interesting situation. So I would pass that off to luck, really. So Warp Zone 10's like, if you don't like atonal music, what is your opinion on minimalism? I love minimalism. I mean, I like small ensembles. Anything that's like, I guess it depends on how minimalist we're talking. I still want to be able to see where it's going. If it's too sparse, then you don't have any direction. So, but I prefer smaller ensembles to bigger ones. Put it that way. Very strongly. So. So Georgia Lambos is asking, unrelated to music, but have you taken the MBTI test? Do you know what type you are? I have not, but I have taken other tests. I'm very interested in psychology, and if you follow my Twitter at all, you might know that I've been listening to a lot of psychology lectures by a Canadian professor named Jordan Peterson lately, and he's a I've learned a lot about psychology for one, but also it's kind of changed the way I've thought about certain music theory topics, which is really interesting, and you'll hear some of that in upcoming videos soon. But I can't tell you results of some of the tests I have taken. So there's this one called 16 Personalities, which I'm not sure what the formal name for the type of test it is, but I've seen the types around quite a lot. And I fit in fairly strongly to the INFJ type. The other test would be the Big Five model of personality, so having to do with openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And I'm fairly high. Yeah, I'm fairly high in openness, which shouldn't be a surprise because I'm a musician. Moderately low in conscientiousness, but very high in orderliness, which is one of the two dimensions of conscientiousness, of the two like subdimensions. Very low in extroversion, relatively high in agreeableness, and exceptionally high in neuroticism. So that's where I am on that. If you're interested in learning more about that sort of thing, you should look at the Big Five personality model. It's really fascinating. Have I ever listened to anything from the Pokemon Coliseum soundtrack? No. Aside from maybe a couple songs that people have sent me before, no, I haven't. Who's my favorite music YouTuber? I look neurotic. Well, I tested it 99% on that thing, so I would imagine so. I think this will be the last question I answer. Who's your favorite music YouTuber? Make sure this link is current. Yep. Okay. There. I would say by far, he is the best game music cover musician out there. His arrangements very rarely stray from the original, but I think his production value, both in terms of the video quality and the audio quality, is just miles above what most YouTubers put out. And I don't mean that in a very harsh way, but it's just that it's it's just that it's rare to find YouTubers doing music with that level of quality, and so I'm just thoroughly impressed by his stuff every time. He's very good. So, and the number of instruments he plays, man, he plays everything. Jeez. So, I think... Okay, I'll answer this one last question, and then I think I should go. What's your favorite composer? I don't think I could list one, so I'll list off several. Koji Kondo, Jun Senoi, Kazuki Yanagawa, Ken Nakagawa, Hayato Asano, Tom Hack, Ruka Kawada, Hajime Hyakuku, Minako Adachi, Motoi Sakuraba. Yeah. So, this was fun. The last time I tried one of these things, it didn't go quite as well. I think my internet was pretty bad at the time. So I'm glad, like, even though it cut out a few times, I'm glad it kind of kept up throughout this. So it was fun. I really enjoyed answering your questions. And see you guys hopefully with new videos fairly soon. Yeah.